Hey all, I'm Darren, and this is the next in a series of videos getting into the origins of the watercolor maps that I make currently. In the last one, I left off with my oil painting phase. Besides starting to feel a bit like a dead end for trying to capture these island experiences, this whole slicing and juxtaposing approach, which I did in both photomontage and oils, I'll just call it montage, wasn't actually doing enough to compensate for what I wasn't getting from landscape architecture practice. That field had been the right choice for me. I liked working with actual scales and dimensions. The issue was more the kind of site that I wasn't getting to design, ecologically intact and diverse, and usually remote and obscure. I needed to try taking landscape architecture itself in my own direction, not just filling in the gaps through artwork on the side. So I started out on what I thought would be a 1 or 2 year break from design practice, enough to just get all of this out of my system. It's ended up extending way beyond that. But this next phase did last about 2 years. It focused on designing islands, not necessarily the kind surrounded by water, and often also designing paths and structures on or in those islands. So I left the montaging behind and stuck to different combinations of traditional drawing types and physical models, like you'd use in landscape architecture. The 2D views were around 15 inches by 20 inches in watercolor on paper, which was better than oil for representing natural patterns and textures, at least for me. I overlaid most of the plan view drawings with representations of topography in other media. Sometimes that was the physical model component. This is one of the more involved designs called Saucer Island. I imagine this island as compressing a crazy amount of ecological and climatic diversity into a tiny area. So, kind of nesting together two of my island types that I described in one of my earlier videos. This island is a wide volcanic cone and crater, as the name implies, so it actually checks off a third island type too. I designed an eco lodge near the coast of the dry western side of the island and a series of pavilions and boardwalks on the wet, boggy rim of the eastern side. All the line work is overlaid in marker on acetate. Most of the other islands are each just represented by a single work, and I stuck to plan view for the painting components. Most of these designs came out of artist residencies in Iceland and on Flinders Island off the coast of Tasmania. They were inspired by landscapes there with varying degrees of imagination and idealization. Here are a few from Iceland. This is a chain of craters and boardwalks loosely inspired by Lockheed Crater Row. And in this and all these standalone works, I scratched up the paper in spots just using my fingernails to add more geological texture. And here are more volcanoes, these with hot springs in the craters, inspired by no one spot in particular. This topography is modeled in stacked layers of plexiglass. These are two urban volcanoes inspired by dreams that I had before and during that Iceland residency. These contour lines are oil paint pen on one layer of plexiglass. These are the first of any of my island theme works with an urban component, which is the fourth of my current island categories. Now, a few from Australia. The topo here is stacked plexiglass in the center and just a single layer of plexi with etching on the left hand side. And this imaginary island itself is quote unquote sliced off from two real life islands that overlap, Flinders Island and Strzelecki National Park in one corner of it. This piece of the park was the most physically and visually accessible, and I wanted to intensify that feeling of knowability by basically encircling it. For this one, I've actually taken the outline from a little islet off the coast of Flinders Island. The real thing is actually flat and dry, but I've blown it up and added topography to give it a wet summit zone. And finally, a few with loose inspiration from some other places. This is my idealized vision of Nahoa, one of the Leeward Hawaiian Islands, with these lush valleys filled with endemic fan palms, basically long and skinny islands within the island. Here I've etched a section cut line into a second layer of plexiglass over the layer with the contour lines. And in this next one, I've taken an actual cinder cone in Death Valley, surrounded it by water, and given it just enough size and elevation to support two boggy highland zones. The downsizing from the scale of the oil paintings was initially for practical reasons, but also the immersive scale of the oils had actually been kind of antithetical to the whole compression concept that drives me to capture and intensify these islands and contrasts in the first place. I want to convey a sense of psychologically grasping these places, of absorbing them in their entirety, not being absorbed by them. But this idea of smallness and rarity in the geographical sense had started to take on another kind of significance too, equality of fragility. By definition, most islands in the natural world or the environmental conditions that create them are precarious in some sense, especially and increasingly thanks to human impacts. Obviously, nature has been in constant flux long before the present day. That's natural in itself. So, trying to freeze it in place is really just another form of grasping. The idea of fragility doesn't really even make ecological sense. But it did start to be an important motivator for me, as it still is, and it's a reason that these smaller scales seemed appropriate. So these plan view watercolors would actually end up merging with the earlier perspective based montages stylistically, eventually leading to the mosaic watercolor maps that I'm making now. And I'll get into that soon in another video.